I did it tonight. I finally used this magical device that Kim, my wife, purchased several months ago. I see it in the junk drawer. We all have a junk drawer, right? This one drawer where you just put a
I
bunch of
got a
miscellaneous
bunch.
stuff. Oh, sure. Well said. I could do with a bunch of junk drawers. I think I have a junk box, a junk desk, maybe a junk life. I'm not sure, but I have a junk drawer for sure. And I looked in it tonight, and I pulled out this little white device. It almost looks like, you know, when you go to the doctor and they hold that thing that like jabs a little needle into you. It almost looks like that. The
Okay.
same colors. But what it is a label maker. You connect
Oh,
over
yes.
Bluetooth to it, and you got this little app. And of course, I mean, it's some inscrutable application written by someone not in America, which has strange words in it and lots of it's very bizarre. The UI interface is strange, but it's really easy. You type in the thing in the app, a little label splits out, and it has that kind of. I spent a lot of time. I need to cut my fingernails, but so thankfully it's possible with this. I spent a lot of time doing that thing, you know, when you got a sticker and you're trying to like jab your fingernail into it just right to separate the things. But then what I figured out is you can just fold it in half. It's one of those that has that little like slice or whatever the term is.
Yeah. Yeah. I was about to
Yeah.
say, did you not
Right.
get the Dymo? Because, I thought that was like the standard.
So that part is great. But so I'm all into the label maker. I'm sitting here. I put it somewhere and I can't find it. Speaking of junk drawers, and I'm thinking I want to put some labels on things. I'm all into this label maker. I'm ready to go. Right. I made a label that said like, you know, Michael's wife that I put on Kim, and we thought that was funny. I had another label. The first label I printed out was the ultimate dad label, which was it said not yours, and I put
Don't
that on my
touch.
iPad. That's right. But I've kind of run out, and so I wanted to ask you two, what labels would you be making, and what would you put them on?
Well, I don't have a ton of label needs. My wife and my son, for some reason, they both liked to use the label maker. So anytime there is a need for a label, they both would, happily jump in. And my wife really likes to take it, I think, overboard. Like she likes to label the different switches in the house where we have we have one panel that's got like, I don't know.
Oh, I thought you meant the network switches.
No. Well, it's funny enough. I did ask her one time to make a bunch of labels for network cables, but ultimately I couldn't get the labels to really stick on the network cable in a good way.
You,
So
you fold them over themselves.
I tried that as well, and it wasn't a good situation. So after
maybe Costco has a box of network cable labels.
I actually went with colors. I just sort of tried to like get as many different colors.
Yeah, that works too.
That was what I found to be a lot easier. But I don't know. I feel like if you have too many labels, I don't know. I don't like to see like tons of labels in the house and stuff like that. So I actually only where I think we have like there's really legitimate confusion between light switches. Will I tolerate?
Well, how about like boxes like USB-C cables?
Oh yeah,
USB-A cables.
I have that. I have, yes, of course. I have an entire like a little plastic organizer of where I had put labels on USB-C to USB-C, all the different cables that that we have in the house. So that is a really good use. So I guess maybe I guess you're hitting on it, Coach. Electronics, right? Labeling.
The outside of boxes, right? You got boxes full of electronics. What's in them? I don't know. Just put a label on the outside.
Put a label on it. That's right. Yeah. Maybe with a little emoticon or something.
But that's the thing. I got my label maker, and I think it came with like 3 rolls of label tape, and I used 1 roll. Right. So I barely use it anymore. But I'm not doing light switches.
I don't know, Coach. I sense you're finding some satisfaction. I'm going to put you in that category of person that finds it satisfying to make labels. I think there really are 2 types of people, like people that don't care at all. That's where I am, and people are like, yeah, I actually really like using the label maker.
Well, as you two may recall, I think in 2003, I did do a presentation about how we should introduce tags to BMC Performance Manager.
Absolutely.
Oh, good stuff.
Inspired by Delicious, no less, right? There's an old school.
Yeah. Delicious and Flickr, exactly. That I wonder if I still have that presentation. I should look.
I wonder if people are still using tags.
If only I'd put labels on my old hard drives, and I could see which one was where.
Well, maybe that's a better question, Coach. do you, because tags kind of show up in different enterprise applications, and even on, I think on the Mac you can tag things with different colors. Like for those, not what Matt just pulled up his labeled. What is that? A labeled power
This says
account?
movies. Yeah, it's
Movies.
just a hard drive full of movies.
But more importantly, I was gonna say, Coach A, like where are you on using tags? Are you actually utilizing tags in any application today?
In your house.
Well, I heard that we need to wrap this up at the top of the hour, so I'm going to keep it short.
I got that. Go on.
All tagging for an hour.
So I use the Descendant of Delicious pinboard.in, which I highly recommend. Great service, and so I use tags probably daily because I read the internet, as I like to say, and I'll tag things and bookmark them there, and then I actually use the tags to look things up. Right, not only like so yes, I use tags. Now I have always wanted to be comfortable with using the tags on the Apple operating system. You've got tags and colors, and I just feel I feel like it's somehow against nature to use
feels wrong.
tags.
I agree.
Yeah. I
I
turn
can-
that off in the settings. I don't even want to see it. You're
when I was working at 451 Research, I tagged my stuff with 451, and so I come across that every now and then. But I just see so much potential there to tag stuff in the file system. But I feel like the file
I'll give
system
you one
is
more.
where the hierarchy works.
The only place I actually use tags now in any consistent way is in 1Password. I will tag the various logins.
Interesting.
For various ways, because also my family's using it. We use it here on the show a little bit, so like I can kind of tag everything.
I could see that. I could see
that's the only place. But that's it. Other than that, I've given up. Bookmark tagging done. I don't do any of that. Don't tag any emails. Don't tag any files. So
I think the there was a big discussion when tags came about in 1873 or whenever it was, that are the tags semantically descriptive of a thing, or are the tags more of like a bookmark? And I think the second is what I use tags for. Is like so as an example, because I'm very egocentric about content. Whenever I write something, I bookmark it and I tag it Cote Writing, right? And so that way I know that I can go to my bookmarks and click on that tag and I have a URL for it all, right? But I don't like tag something with like, positive, right? Like I only tag things when I know I will want to use the tag to find it again.
Sure.
Sort of a modification of the field notes model.
Yeah, it's categorization, not description.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I think one thing we can tag is Pat Gelsinger as ex-CEO of Intel. That's what I was thinking.
Good
of
term.
tags. So so Cote, maybe you were because I guess you worked for Pat Gelsinger and it worked in the Royal Work sense for a short period. I don't even, maybe it was a long period of time. So I don't know. I feel like we should give you first dibs here. What was and you posted the article into the Software Defined Talk channels topic, and I was like, oh,
well, that's just a time zone advantage.
Yes, you did. You got ahead of it. You were ahead of the news that day. So what was your reaction?
Well, I think I think I read you first pointing this out, and then it was subsequently covered. But I think it is. I mean, obviously, he was kicked out, so we can just put it right.
I don't think that's debated.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because it was like this post-dated thing, and like instantly retiring.
He was told he could be fired or he could resign. So and he chose to resign.
And so I think that's an obvious thing to say, but I think maybe. Let's do a comparison, because I was thinking about this earlier today. A year ago was all that OpenAI freak show shit, right?
Nope.
And so this was a lot cleaner, I think, than that was, right? So good job, like doing things very nicely.
The board got their ducks in a row. They didn't let him usurp them, and they will all be there within 6 months, probably.
Right. And I think maybe this set a new standard for wants to spend more time with family, right? It's just like, he's decided to retire. That was my first reaction. Is you don't see the word retire very much in this kind of thing, and so I think execution wise, it was done very well. I think that's fine. And then I think I mean, as far like notoriously, I don't give a fuck about chips. Right? I find it very boring. but I think that it is a clear sign that things are not going well over at Intel. Like
Maybe we
there's
should just
probably
rate. I think,
I could say this is what they call a trailing indicator.
yeah.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
where
uh,
does if I guess the question I have is like, is this one of these things where like it was executed professionally and it was the whole thing? There's really no one to blame because if you go back in time and you listen to Gelsinger's original interviews and presentations, he was very clear. He said like, I don't want to break up the company. He wrote a quote unquote strategy document, which I actually believe he wrote. I actually believe in this case he wrote a lot of it, right? And was like,
mm,
and he explained a very grandiose, complicated strategy that we've covered on many shows before that. And so 3 years into it, it was like, I think the board of directors saw the strategy. They're like, yeah, we want you to do it. Here's like a ton of money to come do it. He's doing what he says. So I think, the meeting I think was actually probably pretty professional. It was like, Pat, we don't think the strategy is going well. Like, it's not going well. He's like, no, you just didn't give me enough time. And so like, no, we did give you enough time. And it's sort of like, you already said you don't want to be the one to break it up or do something different. So it seems like it's just one of those things where it's like, he said he was going to do a thing. The company said they was okay with that. The company decided he was out of time. He thought he probably wanted more time, but it's just people have a difference of opinion. So that's why I think could just be a pretty clean break, right? It's like very clear what everybody's side was.
No, and exactly. I think that highlights the point is that in comparison to the OpenAI stuff, there's no mystery. It's just like, oh, yep, now we're going to break up the company and do something dramatically different, right? Like we're going to figure out how, like, I don't know anything about Intel and the chip market, but here I am on a podcast where we talk about tech stuff. But I think probably what it indicates is like it's done, right? Like we're going to pull it
But
apart.
I think at the strategy,
farm
like
things
almost like
out.
McKinsey consultant level, right? Although maybe that's derogatory. Is like we can all like, I don't know how to manufacture the entire chip, but like we could certainly understand what just how grandiose and how complicated his strategy was like, okay,
Sure.
we're going to like, speed run the manufacturing process. And what we used to do in like, say 6 or 8 years, we're going to do in 4. Simultaneously, we're going to build a brand new business that we've never done before. And, stand up. So this is the whole idea of being a fab and, if you're like an outsourcer, right? We're going to do that. And, oh, by the way, we're also going to simultaneously build GPUs that compete with NVIDIA, right? And we're going to do all of that together. And because I think he is a former Intel, executive that is a good speaker, and I think he likes the details and he can explain them well. I think people just sort of bought off on like, oh yeah, like we think you can do all of that together. But I think it's very easy from the outside to be like, this never had a chance. Like the fact that he thought he could do it, I think is like, I guess we can call confidence.
And I think that last point is a good point in that I think that in the tech world, in this kind of tech environment, there is always a chance if you luck out with certain circumstances. And so in comparison to this or parallel to this, I didn't actually read this whole article yet because it's very long, but I had Claude summarize it for me. There's a write-up of how like Microsoft rescued itself. And you kind of like read through the summary of that. And if we were to go back to, what is this, 2024? I don't know, 5-6 years ago, we would look at Microsoft and be like, ugh, right? Like bizarre. And so like somehow the chain of events that got Microsoft to where it is today is like phenomenal luck. Like all the things that they went through, right? Like dramatic culture change. They like open source now, right? Like they actually are a viable competitor to Amazon. Like all these things that they got over. Maybe I should go read that article in more depth. But somehow they like figured out this weird trap of stuff, right? And similarly, like again, I don't know chips, but like it's not that. Well, to put it another way, the only way that most tech companies are reborn is when they do the impossible, when they have like some audacious sort of leap that they go through, right? Like, and we get really pissed off and like whatever when they don't. Like when IBM's like, we're all in on like robotic cows and Watson and stuff, and they fail at it, we're like, those guys suck, right? But then like if you actually succeed at it, it's a magical sort of thing, right? So like, and I won't say the disclaimer again, but like as I recall, like Nvidia wasn't like that big of a deal until suddenly this thing that wasn't under their control, AI, came about and like made it a big deal. It's not like they caused that to happen, right?
So I agree with everything you said. I think the one thing I'd add to the Microsoft story is they were, for the most part, even when they were quote unquote doing poorly, they were a very profitable business.
That's true.
Yeah.
They had
Right?
Office
And
and
that,
everything.
because
Yeah,
Office and Windows, that money just sort of like it threw off
That
so
was
much
their money
cash.
fountain. Yeah.
It let them
that's
kind of
fair. That's
figure
fair.
stuff out, right? And so the problem, the reason it's come to a head with Intel is that this their monopoly over x86 and the ability
Right.
has changed. So that's why it's a pressing moment, right? Where it's like, and they're laying off 15,000 people, maybe more. So it's like we can't just figure it out. And I think that's to your point, though, Cote. It's like there is something about like just being profitable and hanging around long enough, Apple being the best example of it all, right? Was sort of like, if you stay in it long enough, there's always another chance, like a video game. It's like, as long as you're alive, you can keep playing. And so
Right.
that's
And
what's going on.
Apple's
Yeah.
another good point. For some reason, I've thought about that a lot. Oh, this anecdote a lot over the past 3 months is like, are you the kind of CEO that could go ask Bill Gates for $100 million just to make payroll? Right. Like, which is what Apple did at some point when Steve Jobs came back. Right. And like that was like this strange, weird moment where that moment in time, that one meeting probably determined the fate of our lives, basically, right? Like we would probably be using strange Blackberries with keyboards, right?
Android
Like if Bill
devices,
Gates hadn't
something like
been
that.
like, sure,
Sidekicks. Yeah.
right? Like, and so like there are those like just weird things in the timeline that can totally turn something around, no matter what it looks like, right? And I mean, so who knows? Now, I also agree with what you're saying. Is like obviously it was a Mission Impossible or a what do you call it, a suicide whatnot? Like it's just sort of like, oof, I don't know how you're going to fix that thing. In retrospect, again, I don't know anything about
I
tech.
don't know. I feel like, a lot of times we want to say that because like we didn't know, but I feel like a lot of people, I mean, certainly we talked about it on the podcast, but like lots of people pointed out like just how audacious this was. And I do think this is one of those things where like, to me, I feel like it's been 6 months since I've mentioned the halo effect on here. So I feel like I have a little time, but my number one, of course, number one book.
I think that's a short-term memory loss.
Anyone
there.
wants to read. It's like, I mean, there's like, to me, this is just the perfect example of the halo effect. It's like what he did before really didn't apply to this situation. The fact that he was the one that helped, invent the x86 and build the 46 chips. And there was such a unique moment where the Wintel monopoly got going, and the fact that he was there and a key part of it. But at the same time, see what you're saying before, Kote, all these other things happened around it. And then to bring the person back and be like, well, we think you can do it. And then be like, no, like the situation is different. The market conditions are different. And I just believe this is sort of like, again, in my presentation at Intel, where we've been like, before we do this, let's all just turn to the quick summary of the halo effect. And let's just check down this list. Do we see anything unusual here? And of course, and I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is because it's in Intel, famously, the famous quote from Andy Grove, like only the paranoid survive. And it's like, no, I mean, I think it's always a combination of like being paranoid has nothing to do about it. You have to there's always a sense of luck to these situations. I think any of us would have gone through the period that Intel went through and actually, probably made the same decisions because there was so much money to be made in x86.
Well,
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
like it would have never none of us would have been like, we need to get into like low powered chips. We would have kicked people out of the office. Like, no, we're going to make more money with these chips. And we're going to do it forever because that's like, I mean, that's the most logical thing to do. So I think it's like, you can't just be paranoid. It's just be like, it's almost impossible in these situations to like,
Well, maybe to your point, the key case study here is when Microsoft decided to actually have Office 365 instead of here's a CD-ROM with Office, right? Like when they fully committed to the idea that we're going to be like a SaaS
that was
productivity
post Ballmer, wasn't it? I mean, that was
probably.
Satya. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
and
Satya is the one who like broke up the internal organizations and said, we're not the Windows company.
And so that was the turn for Microsoft, right? The cash, as you were saying, Brandon, the cash cow, the thing that they were doing, and they're sort of like, you don't have to install it on your desktop. Although oddly enough, you still do. if
Right.
you actually want to use it well. So maybe that's against my case here, but
I don't know. I would argue
somehow
they
went through it.
postponed making that decision to the point of like it was the only logical next step. And to your
Yeah.
point, okay, they really have never changed the software. Even to this day, if you have to collaborate, if your life depends on collaborating on a document, you go to Google Docs, right? And that's where you go, because you're like, if you need to both edit simultaneously, right? Like think about all the things we do on this show. We would never share a Word doc and try to create show notes.
I don't even
No.
know how to do
Like,
that.
we would quit this podcast.
It's horrible.
before we would do it. We'd be
I
like,
mean,
we can't work on the
it's-
podcast anymore.
And
so
then the other version, the other version of that is like, I would never use Google Sheets when I could use Excel. Like I'm not a barbarian.
So it's sort of like cool. I mean, Microsoft, I would just argue like they've done absolute minimum, almost a decade into this, is still collaboration in Word, very iffy. So I think in that case, it's just more like, to your point, they just have had so much money and it's extended so long, and it's like, okay, well, it turns out we should do it this way. And they've, and now that they have a very profitable, same thing with Teams. And because before it was Skype, and it was like only now, and we probably can even debate that, like, has Teams gotten to the point that it's like kind of good, for video calls? So it's like,
well, it caught up with like the competition, which, let's be honest, has kind of stagnated too. So,
right.
I mean, Microsoft had a lot of high profile failures too, though. But I think the advantage they had over Intel was they had a defensible territory, right? Nobody was going to break into, Windows. I mean, I love Mac OS and Linux, but they're still not breaking into the Windows, and so that cash cow is very defensible, and Office is probably bigger, but Intel was in a, cutthroat market, and it's not like they were like, oh, nobody else does chips, right? Nobody else does Windows is much more defensible than nobody else does x86.
Well, so maybe this bridges to the other thing of the week. We have Amazon reInvent, and I listened to the Ben Thompson reading his article about it, which is great. He even apologized for once. He had a gigantic quotation from somewhere, and I was glad that he had it. And he even apologized for it, and I was like, "You're not quoting yourself, so it's fine, right?" But he quoted, I think it was Jassy. Which I think you predicted that, Brandon, right? That he would be back on the stage.
He made it back.
So
Godfather returned.
That's right. But as he was going, like, I think there was some commentary, whatever, about their own chips that they make or something, and how it was advantageous for the Nitro or something.
Well, look at you talking about chips.
Yeah, and as I was listening,
infrared, I think they are. Yeah.
As I was listening to that, I think maybe this is where the Intel problem is. Like, my thought was like, why are they making chips, right? Like, what came about in the world that it was even possible for them to make chips, right? That like, because Dell doesn't make chips, right? Like, all these various
companies, that volume of processors,
and the last, let's see, I'm sure this is, I mean, the last two companies in my lifetime that made their own chips were IBM and Sun. And they're not known to be great. And so, like, all of a sudden, these other companies are making their own chips. Apple,
Samsung, Fujitsu,
right? Like all these, like they're, but not, to put it in a weird way, people making chips whose job it is to make chips is not what I'm talking about. It's like these other companies, like, they don't make chips, like Apple, Amazon, all these other people. And so, like, something happened to the tech world where that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And that, like, however that spooled out is like where Intel got fucked.
Well, I think a couple things. I mean, I think the answer is like, one, the hyperscalers and Apple got so big, right, to the point of like they're making such a large volume of chips that it actually started for them from a cost perspective, right? It's just like anything else. It's like, instead of paying this other company so much money, could we do this internally? So that's the first thing that came into it. And then two, each one of those vendors, let's say Google, Microsoft, Apple, and we can put them all in there, said like, hey, if we made our own chips, we can actually not only make them cheaper, but we can customize them to do specific things that we think are more important, that are optimized. And Facebook does this as well, that are optimized for the workloads that we're doing. And that will give us a whole nother set of both performance gains as well as cost, ability to cut costs. So that, I think, is what changed. And then, of course, the fact that ARM was out there And so they didn't necessarily have to quote unquote design everything. They had a good starting point, an instruction set, some reference designs, and then they could just go hire people to start working off that. All of that together conspired in a way. And then I think Intel probably made the logical decision. It's like, hey, we're not worried. Like, we don't care about low power. We just need to make faster chips. That's what they've been doing all along. Whereas all these other places actually, turns out, if you're paying the power bill for all of AWS or all of Google, power actually is a huge cost. So they care, but Intel doesn't care. So all of those things, I think, are the reason, like, if you will, custom silicon, as they say, has become in vogue, right? What do you?
Well, and like 2 points. The first Amazon chip, the Graviton One, wasn't a general purpose CPU. It was a specialized processor that they built for their workloads. And then they bought Annapurna, the ARM manufacturer, and like decided, oh, we've got this specialized hardware that we built because nobody else has network. It was like a DPU, a data processing unit, that accelerated stuff for Nitro. And I mean, that's pretty esoteric, but it showed them what, it got them a win, and gave them the encouragement to like keep going down that path. But the real parallel I see here between, the chips, these x86 chips, is the American car industry versus the Japanese car industry in the 80s, right? American cars were big and clunky, fast, muscle cars. And when the price of gas hit, whatever hit that drove everybody to like need cheaper cars, the American cars were like not really there. And Japan showed up with, their Corollas and Civics, and just, ate up the bottom of the market. And America kept going to higher and higher margins. And like, if you want to buy a sedan today, you probably have very few American choices, other than like a Tesla, which,
that's a good analogy.
I mean, the bottom of the market is owned by people willing to like work in volume. Right. And as you continue to move up and up, the volume will slowly outpace you. And now, China's flooding the bottom of the market with, EVs, which has Tesla, complaining to Trump.
But I do think ultimately this it is kind of back to the whole thing about, like, to ultimately defeat any company, you turn their strengths into their weaknesses. And you go back in time, the Intel strength was always they had the x86, they built the best chip, and they had a fully integrated, vertically integrated company. They manufactured it, and they even had this phrase called copy exact. They built fabs, they copied them exactly. They were the premier place to get things manufactured. I mean, they were the best at manufacturing, so they had the best chips and they had the best manufacturing, and that ultimately was their success. But then it's like, okay, you turn it on its head and be like, you don't have the best chips. Turns out this other company, TSMC, they don't care what you have. You show up with a blueprint or a chip design, they'll make whatever you want. And you know what? Yeah. They're great at it. That's all they do is think about manufacturing. They don't think about chip design at all, right? Yeah. And they're great. So as soon as you kind of crack the code, you're like, well, Intel no longer has the chips we really want. And they're stuck. Only they can manufacture chips for themselves, right? Now, what was their greatest strength is their greatest weakness. And so that's why they're in such a difficult spot. Like, do you tear it all down, or you try to design and manufacturing together, but they're so far behind at this point, right? It's going to take a long time for them to kind of sort all of this out.
Well, so let me run another thing by you two, that I think about every now and then, which is, okay, so here in the Netherlands, you have this company ASML, and they make the machines that make chips. And it seems like maybe they have 4 customers, right? And if I'm doing the math right, which is like,
and they can't sell to China,
which is wild, right? Like, you should never have a business that has 4 customers. That is a crazy situation to be in. Which brings me to my next point. So, like, I won't go all academic, but if you look
at met the U.S. defense industry?
Well, sure, but maybe if your 4 customers have guns and nuclear weapons, that's a different strategic, like, business.
You talk about margins and overruns.
Anyhow, like, if you go back to the Michael Porter's 5 forces things in strategy, one of them is the relationship between the seller and the supplier, right? And your suppliers and your buyers. And so it seems like one rule that you should apply in any business, especially tech, is that if the relationship with your suppliers and your sellers dramatically changes, like all of a sudden you go from every single business in the world to 3 customers that are driving like I don't know, 40, even 30% of your revenue, you should figure your shit out because it's going to get crazy. Right. And so, like, it seems like structurally that's what happened to the chip market is you had, and I remember at Dell, we also like saw this a lot in hardware, is all of a sudden, as we would say, the hyperscalers, I guess you still say that.
Yeah.
They were spending so much money on the hardware that it was like affecting the rest of the business. And in the case of chips, from my understanding, what you all are saying is the only reason that was possible was because of ARM. If ARM didn't exist, it wouldn't happen. Right?
Well, it definitely made it a lot easier, right? I
Yeah.
think there's a clear choice.
It was like the oil or the lubrication that made it happen. Right. It would
Right.
have been very difficult and a lot less probable.
But
Well-
just I was there for a second, but remember, like, it didn't happen by accident. Like, ARM was sort of like left for dead. It's like, oh, we need these small chips that are super low power, that are really cheap, that are kind of used in consumer grade, you know, cars and all the different things. So they just were kind of sitting out there. It's like, this is some business nobody, quote unquote, thinks is a huge growth, right? They're designing the small chips, and that business has been around for a long time, right? And it was sort of like, yeah, why? Like, who cares? Like, yeah, we don't know. That's the low end. Nobody cares. So a little interventor dilemma. And then it was like, whoa, wait a minute. People start looking around. It's like, you know what we need? We need to make our own chips. We need them to use less power. Everyone's looking around. It's like, well, why don't we just use this ARM thing? So again, it's more like circumstance. It wasn't like they were like preparing for this. It just
right.
I mean, Apple kicked off a lot of that when they did not use Intel for the iPhone.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the big game changer, and then that led to Apple eventually buying their own design company,
PA Semiconductor, right?
Yeah.
And then that became the foundation for their silicon chips.
Right. And I realize this is a bunch of armchair quarterbacking or whatever. I recently asked one of my UK friends, like what the phrase for that is in the UK with European football, and they couldn't come up with it. So if some listener knows, like, what is it called on? I don't even know when you like in Europe when football.
Sunday morning quarterback.
Yeah, there you go.
Hindsight was 2020.
Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah, it's Monday. There you go. Monday morning quarterbacking. Isn't it armchair quarterbacking? Isn't that a phrase? Or did I make that up? In my head?
Yeah, that definitely. That's a phrase.
So there must be a phrase for football in the rest of the world. Anyhow, what was my point? So you got the arm, you got this. I've lost my point in trying to figure out my armchair. Oh, here we go. So it does seem like maybe it's kind of an innovator's dilemma thing there, a disruption thing. But so basically Intel should have bought ARM and that would have fixed everything.
Well, I think ultimately, I mean, if you go back in 2020, it's like Intel, if it wanted to keep doing it, it ultimately would have needed to do something. It would have needed to embrace the low power chip and created either bought ARM or created an instruction set and built a chip that was so incredibly advanced that like all these companies decided not to, if you will, go out and buy or start and build their own chips. But I think, again, probably an impossible decision to make, right? You're sitting there, the cash trucks are just coming in, right? And someone's telling you that the future is going to be this other thing. And it's like, this is where I think people just kind of say, it's like, no, we're not going to work on that now. We don't see the need, right?
And Intel dabbled with a little bit of investment into some of the RISC-V ecosystem, which, everyone who is cognizant of the ARM history knows that RISC-V is coming for ARM just because it's, less friction for chip makers. It's not this year, it's not going to be in 5 years, but it's coming.
Yeah.
And, ARM is going to get x86'd.
Yeah. Well, into the future, it's like, it's all, and this may be, super dark, but it's always darkest before dawn. It's like, well, I mean, this is the moment Coach is like, at these moments where the company has to basically redefine itself. It's like, maybe this is the place where like, maybe they do split up Intel and things like that. And maybe they do something like Matt Ray says, it's like, they try to get ahead in an area other people are avoiding. Maybe it is embracing, what was it? Not risk, but what's the instructions?
RISC-V.
Yeah, RISC-V. They do that, right? And they start to kind of get going there. So it's just like, it's one of those things, like it's going to be hard to,
but yeah, the problem with RISC-V is it's a commodity market. It will always be a commodity market.
Well, something new. I guess all I'm saying is like, only when a company gets to this level of crisis can it like really face up. And this will be the interesting thing about who they pick as the next CEO. Like most of the time it takes a couple cycles, right? Like they'll be like, okay, there was Gelsinger, then maybe there'll be some internal people, but like, you have to really
Selipsky's free.
You have to get to real crisis before you're really willing to like make radical change. So I don't know. Intel's probably not there yet, but like one more cycle through a CEO, I think they will be there.
So you think the
Yeah.
next CEO is just set up to fail already?
I do. I don't think, because I mean, I think there's the political problems going on with the whole CHIPS Act, and they have to sort out that, like, are they going to get the money from the US? How's that going to work? That's become a really big problem. And then there's going to be, could they even break it up if they wanted to sell it to different people? Will the government step in and not allow it to happen? So there's a lot. There's probably, I won't say failure. There's like a cleanup CEO work ahead, right? Where it's like, someone's just got to get this thing, figure out what we can possibly do. And then there will probably be another CEO who comes in and ultimately is like, here's the future. I will lead us to the promised land. That's my guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Now they'll just sell off all the parts to everyone. Bring some PE person in who can break it up and do
Oof.
and with all the things that would be sold to American companies and all this kind of stuff. And there's I don't think anything else will happen at this point.
Intel, a Boeing company.
Whatever.
Well, I feel like, I mentioned it on the Cloudcast. I was on that this week. So, but I'll mention here is like, the real prediction is like AMD buying part of Intel. That would be amazing. That's sort of the cat sleeping.
Well, I
don't know. I mentioned them. I mean, Dell does this kind of thing. They could, and would that be antitrust if you had the machines that, maybe
Dell more than anyone has. If there's someone that knows the private equity play, it has to be Dell.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Qualcomm apparently already made a run at them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is Qualcomm US based though? Didn't that like mess up?
Well, I don't know. I don't know anymore.
It's complicated. Right? I think it's like part of it isn't. But like, yeah, you could see like an AMD, Dell, Qualcomm. I don't know. Get everyone in a room and enough investment bankers. Probably some deal happens.
Let's make it happen.
I think a bunch of black Suburbans drive up to Round Rock and a deal is made.
I like it.
Things are settled.
What about HP?
HP. Printers, big business. Now, speaking of disruption, it seems like over there in Amazon land, their plan is we're get this whole AI thing. What if we made that? What if we're the Walmart of LLMs? We just commoditize it and overrun everyone, and we sell every type of LLM you want, because what really matters is latency for your apps, and having all that, the kind of layer on top of everything that like makes apps matter. Which I think I was listening, as I mentioned earlier, I was listening to the excerpt from The Return of Jassy, and I don't know, I don't disagree with him that like the kind of little engine you have that does the magic. What they don't tell you is that like an AI thing, you can do like one single like prompt on a command line to give a response, but then you got to take the reply and send it back to it. And then you got to have like a way of memorizing things. And then you got to have like the RAG thing. And then you got to have this and you got to have that. All these sort of things that you pile on top of it to make it so you can just play some D&D. And I think maybe that all that layer on top is what matters, especially if you can just host the models. But that's my impression from like maybe 3 minutes of listening. I was like doing my hair and things like that. But you watched the whole thing. I saw you live blog it.
Live Slack it.
You guys did some serious work there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we did watch the whole thing, and I do think maybe another way to kind of come at it was sort of like Garmin, the new CEO. It was almost like he was given like legacy AWS, and he comes out and he just played the hits, baby. Compute, network, storage, went through it all. Announced a lot of different new things, why they're better, faster, cheaper on all of those things. Gave us a little history of like, because he was the person that, I don't know, there's like a million fathers of VC2, but he was one of the people that helped lead it. So he kind of told some stories about that. Then he even went back and told us all about Nitro again, right? Matt was referencing this about how again, like I feel like we've heard this story like a million times, but like, Nitro helped them offload virtualization and they have all these things to do. So you kind of had all of that, right? All good stuff, right? Honestly, that's probably where like 90% of the money is made. And then he introduces obviously his boss. Jassy returns to the stage from first time since being Amazon CEO.
Now hold on, I got to ask you, Brandon, how did that feel? You're watching it.
Good. It was like for me, it was like,
you're like,
oh, home, baby. I was like,
the master's returned.
Because Garmin was like, I think he was better than Slepsky, right? He was a little bit more relaxed, but you can tell he's like a clone of Jassy because he's like so in the details, right? Like I cannot tell you how much detail they went through explaining this distributed database and the fact they invented this hardware device that like, basically allows time to sync. Like you could just say what I said. I would have been like, I would have granted them. I'd be like, sounds great. I believe you did it. But like, there was like a good 20 minutes of going through this. And like, I mean, I think we were all bored out of our minds. Like, I'm sure it was
So what you're
impressive.
saying is they could have announced AWS Time Machine, and after about 10 minutes, you'd be like, let's move on.
Let's move on.
Come on.
I really was. I was like, yes, like time, you've synchronized time around and you can make database commits faster and it's great. Awesome. Let's move on. But like they really wanted to talk about that. The same thing with the Nitro. It's like we know about that. But anyway, but then Jassy comes out and it's interesting because he does come back with like he has like just slightly more energy. And again, he is all over. You could tell like I don't know what he's been doing. I see him sometimes in the luxury boxes of the Thursday night football games, but he is clearly studying AI in his off hours because he went through and it's just the classic Amazon or AWS and Amazon story. It's like they're the everything store. They want to have everything. And the message is like, we have every model you could possibly need. They have, Amazon Bedrock, which essentially allows you to like put guardrails around your AI chatbot, as well as use your own data through, retrieval augmented generation or RAG. And then they have all the models. And then at the end, they basically say they've introduced their own models, which throughout the presentation, it was sort of like, oh, Anthropic is great. But turns out we built something almost as good and it's cheaper, right? And that was kind of like throughout the whole presentation, that was like kind of Jassy's message, right? It was just sort of like, oh, we have ours is not quite as good, but it's a lot cheaper. Oh, and we found out, and then he gives it the own example because I think this is the way Jassy kind of sold it to like Gardman. I'm coming in. He's like, I'm going to come in as the Amazon CEO and explain how we Amazon are using all of the other retail places. And so he went through all these different applications like Rufus and like all the things you can see on the Amazon website. So you kind of got to the point of like, well, it all makes sense. And they, the big thing that I think they would say now is they have foundational models that are on par with all the other foundational models. And they really want you, the customer. And really it comes down to, they want everyone to build a chatbot using Amazon Bedrock. And they want you to ultimately use their either foundational model or their specific distilled model. And that's, to me, is what they're selling. And it really just, we were kind of joking in the Slack as we were talking about it. Like, what are the use cases? The use cases are chatbots, call center agents, and development co-pilots. Those are the three things. And it's like, maybe it's an exercise for you, Cote. It's like, what is the total addressable market of everybody who conceivably wants to build one of those things? Because that is where that's the actual money that can be spent in the near term to, if you will, make back some of all this money people are spending on GPUs. And I have no idea what that is.
I think rough back of the envelope cocktail napkin is you take the VDI market times 3 because most of it's call center, right? And you're going to add like a couple of other things on top of it, and that's what you're looking at for those 3 things, right? Because developers aren't going to pay for shit. Like, they're going to figure out some way around it. Although I don't know, maybe they'll play a little bit, but still, like, I call centers basically VDI as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
All right. What about this? So let me say, if at the beginning of the internet, or as internet became more popular and people are building websites, like, well, it turns out everybody needs a website. Okay, because I think if the most generous interpretation of this is sort of like every website that we're going to go to eventually, like it has search, will have a chatbot that you use to speak to that website, right? So let's just assume for the moment that's the case. So it's like, I don't know how many commercial websites that would fall in this category, but like hundreds of thousands, I would guess, and it's like, well, if everybody did it, right? Like, what does that add up to? Like, kind of like if every company had to build a website at the beginning, what kind of money does that come through?
Yeah. I mean, whatever market Squarespace is in, that's the TAM.
I will say no, but at the end, right, it is like, maybe this is, as we wrap up, is to bring it kind of full circle. It's like, you can always take the strengths of a company and you turn it against it, and that's how you make it fail. And it's like, it has never been more clear that AWS and Amazon wants to be the everything store for all of this, right? And they clearly are. But like, if someone comes out and says like, because like I watched a little bit of today's kind of the more the deep dive, and there are so many Amazon Bedrock services. I must have saw 20 Bedrock services, which is kind of like the way you build all this together, to the point of like, oh, well, it turns out, with all this AI, what we get? just more infrastructure and just more things to manage, right? In
Oh,
no
sure.
way does it feel simpler, right? Kind of to your thing about Cote, it's like, didn't we already have all of this stuff? Like, why is this just getting more and more complicated?
Why?
And so my point is, like, I guess, and this is sort of like the anti-Amazon stance would be like, no. If someone just came out with one model that kind of just did everything and we didn't have to do all of this stuff, all the guardrails, the pre-training, the RAG, the security. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And it's like, you know what I want? I want something where I don't have to do any of that. And it just sort of works, right?
Yeah.
So if you got to that, or if it actually happened, Amazon would be in deep trouble. And what Andy Jassy and Gartman would tell us is like, no. Everyone always thinks there's going to be one thing. It's never that way. That's why they have, like, I think they've said something like 200 different server instances, 10 different database types, or even more, right? And it's just like, it can't keep getting bigger, is what I keep thinking in my mind. It's already too big.
I think I haven't thought of this, but like, what is top 3 things that us thought leaders would tell companies about digital transformation? Which is like, you don't want to customize your software and have a bunch of variations. You want to consolidate and have a single thing. And I think Amazon is like, just embrace it. Just go crazy.
So
every single team, their own stuff.
Yeah.
Customize it to their own needs. Totally fine. One bill, right? Like
that's
whatever
exactly
you want.
right. That's exactly right. I spent some time talking with a customer this week who has some big AI initiatives, and they're all in on Bedrock. I was like, really? I mean, I was just kind of, surprised. And they're like, because of that roadmap, they're like, we don't know exactly what we're going to need, but we know it's not going to be one size fits all. And we're used to going a la carte with our AWS usage. They've got, hundreds of teams. And so they're like, it's just going to be the reality that we're going to have, 10 different AWS AI services that we use inside of Bedrock.
Yeah.
And, they will be there for us, because they've got a good relationship, obviously, with that bigger company. But yeah, so I expect, as Amazon, figures out what services people need that are small and digestible. I mean, because essentially, like when EC2 came out, you're like, well, what's the next digestible piece? Oh, we need this, network, internet gateways. Oh, we need, storage. Oh, we need this block storage. You just kind of incrementally go through that, and each thing you touch becomes a service. Well, AI, you're not going to be able to just fit everything into one big box. So just start thinking about it as 10 services or whatever that you're going to get an AWS bill for.
Yeah.
And they seem pretty happy with this.
Well, speaking of things that people seem pretty happy with, Brandon, do we have any bureaucracy?
Couple quick things this week. One, Craig Box wrote in to let us know that you do pronounce Quay, Quay.io, which is the Red Hat site. You actually do pronounce it Quay, because it sounds like the people that were doing it at Red Hat, that's what they started saying, even though it was incorrect. So where it normally would be key. Matt, you corrected me last week, because that is the correct English pronunciation of this word. It's key.
Yeah.
But those people that were like me, they didn't know that either. So I don't know. Like, it's like proper English would say, Matt, you're right. But I guess, like, when you create a word or a brand, you declare the pronunciation. So Quay is the correct pronunciation
proper
in
nouns,
the context of Red Hat. So go ahead, Matt.
Proper nouns are pronounced the way the people who named it. I had a friend who always wanted to call Lano Yano, and I was like, no, it's Lano. There's double L's. It's pronounced Lan.
Yeah.
So there you go. So
just more. They're right. You're wrong. You get to choose. You get to choose.
Maybe the number one learning of this entire podcast with me is like correcting of many mispronunciations I've had in my life. So that was another one that I've now sort of
here's another fun one. As long as we're diving into pronunciation trivia, eBPF no longer stands for anything. It's an acronymless acronym.
Like it.
And this, like I just want to interject here. I know we've all tried to learn several languages, but this is what makes English the best language and the most inscrutable. Is you can pronounce things however you want, and if you do it enough, that's official. And we have It's just
Why can't
basically
everyone speak English like the Americans?
there's your post PhD level education on the English level is a book I've never read, and its title says it all, which is the whole point, which is English as she is spoken, and that's it. That's all you need to know about the English language.
Okay, well, that was one thing. The other couple quick things, following up on maybe kids defeating the security or parental controls. One, Chris reports that his son was changing his MAC address on his NIC on his computer to get around time-based network blocking. I was like, well done.
I ran into that one. We blocked our MAC addresses.
Okay, you got to work. So Cote, if you go through this, check the MAC addresses if you're locking things down. Chris also suggests Cote. He says, don't go the audit route. He says, "quote
Yeah,
You're just making more work for yourself and encouraging a different set of fanciful explanations, aka lies, about the low-level details. What was audited? E.g., I wasn't playing games. I was just listening to music to help me sleep. So yeah, so Cote, if you go the audit route, I think as anyone that's ever done an audit, it's like, let's not use the audit as the way to do it.
You don't want to go there.
Don't do that.
No, it's no good. And my proof of that is that one of my children, who I was thinking to audit, they have been using Chrome to quote unquote draw a lot recently, and so I'm not sure what's up with that.
All right, and then finally, as always, you're getting to a Christmas time of year, and everyone needs some stocking stuffer. And what better stocking stuffer than software-defined talk stickers? So if you want some stickers, or you want many stickers, email your postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com. I will send you a sticker anywhere in the world.
Well, there's only two conferences I want to mention. There's Configuration Management Camp coming up February 2nd to 5th. One of those days is workshops, which is great. In Ghent, that's in Belgium, or Ghent, or I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyways.
However they pronounce it is right, Cote. We just had this conversation.
No. Well, that's actually like the Dutch up in Amsterdam will say you got to pronounce the G one way, but then the Dutch down in South Netherlands, they're like, I don't think
where is this town spelled Ghent?
But then you get to the Flemish, who are like further south, the north of Belgium. They got their own thing going on. So maybe it's not only English who suffers from this or delights from it. Anyhow, also there's DevOps Days LA and Scale 22X, March 6th and 9th in Pasadena, which I'm sure is also mispronounced. California, also mispronounced. And I just saw, I thought I would submit a paper, but I think I missed their CFP. So I won't have one or a talk, but that's too bad. You should check those conferences out. They're both great. They're some of the better conferences that happen in our space in the year. Now, speaking of better conferences and better things, Matt Ray, what do you have to recommend this episode?
Well, I tried to put off playing it for a while, but the expansion for Factorio is out. And if you played Factorio 1, Factorio Space Age, the expansion is even more crack-like. It's really good. So it is a factory builder space exploration game that kind of just fine-tunes everything that was addictive about the first one and makes it even more so. So you've been warned. It's really good.
Now, I thought that was going to be a game where you find the non-divisible parts of a space station.
That's more my sci-fi book recommendations.
How about yourself, Brandon? What do you have to recommend?
A couple of things. I mentioned it earlier, but I was on the Cloudcast this week. So if you want to hear a little bit more about Intel and a little bit more cloud news discussions, check that out. Always fun to be on with Brian and Aaron. And for my recommendation this week, going to recommend, I don't know, one of the classics here. I'm going to recommend Apple AirTags. Of course, if you don't already know, it's just basically put a little AirTag on anything you want to be able to find, and it makes it very easy to find it. And I'll give you the reason I'm recommending it this week is quick story. My wife, we have our cars are very similar. We have the fobs look identical, and so I went to go get in the car, and I couldn't. Usually it's hung up right by the door. Can't find my keys. I have no idea where they are. So I whip out my phone and I look up on the AirTag, and it shows that my keys are actually with my wife at her workplace. So it immediately was obvious what had happened, that she had taken them. And I thought to myself, this probably saved me a good hour, maybe 2 hours of me just searching the house for the keys, being like, the car's here, the keys have to be here. Where did I leave them? So I just think it's one of these ROI things. It's like, the amount of frustration and time this saved me was immense. So it was definitely worth whatever the $25 or $24 it was to get an AirTag. So yeah, so if you haven't done it already, AirTag your keys or whatever else is important to you.
AirTag's
that
better
use
than
case.
tile. I've got
I
a
never use
tile on my
I've
keys.
only ever used AirTag. So
I've got a tile on my keys and an AirTag for my luggage, and like the tile's fine, but the AirTag just it's a smoother experience through.
Well, I was gonna say the other quick plug for AirTags is like certainly we were talking before the show about helping if we're parenting our children a little bit, but it's like it is great to like when they go somewhere, especially as far away and on their own, it's like you can AirTag the things that you want to know where they are, like did they pack their bag, do they have their passport, whatever, right? And it's like, and then you can just look when they leave. You don't have to ask them if they packed everything or if they have their bags because you can just see it there, which makes your life better. And they enjoy not being annoyed by you. So that's another pitch for AirTags.
This is like a counterintuitive thing that kids don't understand, as it were, is that if parents know more about their location and their status, they will give them more freedom, which I think takes a while for people to understand. So put that in your stocking this Christmas. Anyhow, my recommendation is I was talking with one of my coworkers, Adib, who I did I've been doing some AI podcasts with him. If you go to tanzutalk.com, you can find them or watch them in the VMware Tanzu YouTube channel. And he was talking about how Claude is great. And so, me, I was like, I got to try that out. And so I tried it out this weekend. And Claude is fantastic. Claude.ai. It's much better at playing D&D than ChatGPT is.
That's all that matters.
Exactly. I don't know why or how, but it's just more. My new spectrum is if you were to be make a spectrum of the AIs on interestingness versus like talking to a piece of concrete. Gemini is concrete that you're talking to, and now ChatGPT is in the middle. But Claude, it's over there. It feels very human. Something's going on over there with Dungeons and Dragons. Also, it's all of the services, they have this kind of like, give us a prompt you want to use every time you start a chat and a bunch of files you want us to put in our, I don't even know what, vector, rag, whatever, like files you want us to regard. And all of them have that. And I think the way Claude implements it is the best with what they call projects instead of spaces that Perplexity has or GPTs that ChatGPT has. The GPTs that ChatGPT has are kind of the equivalent of like the ribbon in a Word document where you're just like, I have no idea what's going on here. Or it's kind of like using Photoshop. It's just too much. And the Perplexity stuff, I don't know what they're doing over there. Very weird. But I think the Claude way of doing stuff is good. So try out Claude if you think your AI stuff is not too interesting. However, one thing that is very interesting, and that is what you just listened to, which is softwaredefinedtalk.com/496, which is to say, software defined talk number 496. We have a great Slack channel where you can read all sorts of things, get all sorts of discussion. There was we got a book and film thing that is interesting. We've got sports, which I don't read, links that we have during the week, all sorts of discussion, which is fantastic. You should check that out. Also, if you've listened this far and you enjoyed the podcast, we recently restarted our Software Defined Interviews podcast with Whitney, Lee, and myself. And we have, I think, about 4 episodes that we've already recorded that will be coming out. Some of them are great. Some of them are just fine, but they're all enjoyable. So go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com or search that up in your podcast listener and subscribe to it. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Good as always.
Amazing timing.
All right, man. I know you need to run.
Yep.
And I need to run. So good to see Brett, Michael, and several other people watching on the stream. We will probably stream this time next week, and then we'll probably streaming a little bit off schedule around the holidays. But stay tuned.